All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I didn't see a lot of you at the fun run at 6:15 this morning, but this counts, having come all the way back to this room. I think you got your mileage in. So thank you for making the trek to nerd out with us about packaging. If you were hoping to fly under the radar, this might be a good opportunity to leave the room, because we are going to have a discussion, but we're going to throw some questions back at you as well and have a mic coming around, because we all touch packaging in slightly different ways. So we're going to have you on your phones doing a poll at the beginning. We're going to have some discussion, so prepare yourself for that. What are we talking about? We are talking about the paradox of packaging today, which we could probably define that in and of itself individually a million different ways. Done well, packaging is a phenomenal solution with our lens of food waste, our hat of food waste on. Done poorly, it drives more waste of food and materials, right? So there's a challenge, there's a tension. These things don't always get along. Sometimes they do get along, but like, where are those opportunities? What we want you to walk out of the room with today is hopefully some new information from our amazing expert panel and from the people sitting next to you in the seats. And I would like, in the spirit of Dana's opening comments today about the great redesign of the food system, start asking that question, like, what if? Like, where do we want to be 20 years from now? My challenge to you is not to solve that, but it's to think about what is one thing you can do leaving the room today, a piece of knowledge you can take with you, an action you can take, an influence you can have on this issue. And I might ask some of you to share what that is at the end. So prepare yourself, be thinking about that. That's your homework as we go through this today. But to get there, we need to talk a little bit about what is the challenge, what are the opportunities, what is this paradox of packaging that we're talking about, and we'll bring you along in that discussion with us. So before we go much further, this is us. We're excited to chat with you today. If you can get your phones out, before I even introduce my panel, please get your phones out, scan this QR code. I'm going to leave this up here for a minute till I see less phones in the air, and then we'll pull up our poll. All right, everyone got it? We still got some scanning. Good. Grab that QR code. Is it working for people? Thumbs up. Okay, great. Let's wait. Give you 10 more seconds to scan in. All right, if people come in late, there's another way to join, so don't worry. All right, let's go ahead and switch over to the poll itself. And we can go to the next slide. All right, question number 1, who are you? Tell us where you come. This is going to help us in our discussion today know who we're talking to. If you've come in or did not scan the QR code, there's a mini one over on the right here as well for you to join. 50 people in here. That's awesome. Wow, how are 35% of you other? I want to dive into that first. Okay, so food businesses are leading so far. It's a close race with solution providers that are not focused on packaging. Okay, you others, shout out some things for me so we know what you're talking about. Oh, large-scale commercial depackaging. That's very relevant for this conversation. Okay, what others do we have? Composting, okay. State government, thank you. Large-scale depackaging. We'll pull a few of you up in these chairs in a minute. NGO, great. Processors, okay, thank you. All right, let's go to our next question. Please listen to the first instruction. One word. A sentence is really going to mess up this visual. What is one word describing what you would like to get out of this session today? You can hyphenate if you so choose. Compound words, yes. Clarity is getting bigger and bigger. That's relevant for what we're going to talk about. Great. Lots of info and knowledge. What are some of these little ones? Direction. Roadmap, yep. Regulation. We'll talk a bit about regulation. I see a hyphen. Thank you for whoever went with that. Empower. That's a good one. Empowerment. Hope. Ooh, okay. We will try and tackle hope. We'll do our best. World peace. Oh, okay. Someone's having fun now. All right. This is great. Information, clarity, knowledge, that I think is all kind of synergizing around this idea. And we will get, hopefully, at least that far. All right. Let's go to our next question. We'll do one more of these, I think, for now. This is a sliding system on your emotional state at the moment. Do you feel like packaging offers more peril or promise right now? I wasn't really sure how this is going to... This is a good visual, actually. Okay, 2.8. I don't know exactly what we're out of, but it looks like that's the lower half right now. Peril. It is skewing towards peril, yeah. All right, we still have a few... We have all positive responders left. Come on in. We have plenty of seats up here. If people want to sit down, I understand if you want to stand as well. We got plenty of seats up front. All right, I think we got a few more. Anyone else want to get a vote in? You can only vote if it's a promise. I'm kidding. Okay, so we're not terribly far on the left here, but we are probably in agreement that it's more peril than promise at this moment. All right, if we can switch back to our slides, please. We'll come back to this in a little bit, so we're not totally done. Let me get back to here, just so you kind of know who we are. So to kick off our panel, I'm going to ask each of our speakers to introduce themselves and maybe just give us their response to the questions we just saw on the screen. Feel free to answer with your own one word or your own promise or peril or any reactions to what you have here. I will excuse myself from that exercise because I'm the moderator and I can do that. But I will introduce myself. For those I haven't met in the room, my name is Jackie Suggett. I'm on the ReFed team, focused on our work with food businesses and also our work around community engagement, including the summit. So this is, my cup is full, as they say, I think, with the event, bringing people in and just seeing all you here in the room and having the chance to have this discussion today. And I'll pass it to Gina.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. My name is Gina Cadby. I am with Western Growers. We are a grower association that represents family farmers on the West Coast. And I guess, I was looking at this promise or peril. I think 2.7 is slightly above half of 5. So, I mean, it's cup half full, maybe. I would love some clarity as well. Maybe you guys can give me some of that. There was a mention of roadmap, which is something that I was going to bring up as well. We have a roadmap for sustainable fresh produce packaging that we developed last year, really just looking at the functionality of, why do we put food in packaging in the first place? So anyhow, we focus on fresh produce, I should say.
Oh, there it goes. I'm Rebecca Chesney. I'm Vice President of Sustainability at Guggenheimer, which is a food service company focused on the corporate dining sector in the United States. If you see ISS, it's not the International Space Station, as much as I wish it was. But this ISS is a parent company. It's a facilities management company based in Copenhagen that operates facilities and food service around the world. But my purview is North America. And as someone focused on sustainability, we kind of have 3 different areas that I focus on. And one is zero waste workplaces, because we operate food in workplaces. So I, in the strategy, bucket together food waste and plastics waste because they are very much related. So I'm very glad we're having this conversation. And I shouldn't leave you hanging. The other 2 are low carbon kitchens and resilient menus. So happy to talk about any of those with any of you. I think for me, I'm looking for more inspiration, partnerships, learning. I've had that pleasure of engaging with Gina on packaging and with ReFed through the U.S. Food Waste Pact. Plug for that if you're not a member or signatory. And I'm excited to get to meet Leslie and see how we can connect together. On the promise and peril, I would say, not just because I tend to be an optimist, but I'm a little bit more on the promise side because the energy around packaging seems to be where the energy around food waste was maybe around the 10-year ago mark when ReFed first got started. I think the conversation, maybe it's because of EPR, which we will talk about. Maybe it's just because we're getting to the crisis point where we were with food waste, where more people were aware of the problem. More people are aware of plastics and waste and microplastics and the impact of those. So, actually solving it feels obviously very complicated, but I feel more promise because I think the momentum is shifting to this being an area of focus, and maybe 10 years from now we'll be able to celebrate progress in plastics waste and reduction in the same way that we've been able to celebrate progress in food waste reduction.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. It is a privilege to be here. I'm Leslie Rogers, Marketing and Communications Director for BPI. We are the North American Authority on Compostable Products and Packaging. We're a 501c6 organization, so that's membership-based, and we are also a certifying body. So we have the BPI certification for compostability, the commercial compostability, as well as commercial and home, thanks to our recent certification that launched in December. But I think that, with our membership base and our vision is a world without organic waste. And we're really driven to supporting the transition to the circular bioeconomy. That means we need to have all stakeholders in the room. So if you look at our membership, if you look at our board, you're going to see stakeholders from all the way from compostable resin manufacturers, everyone that touches a compostable product or package, including procurement, including the waste generator, and then through the hauler and composter. So we're really here to build successful systems that work. And make sure that everyone is in the room and making that as smooth a process as we can. I think thinking about, peril, I think there are some threats in the industry, specifically for compostability, and I think that BPI really works hard to be that voice. I'm here today to provide, hopefully, clarity, to provide answers, and also to hopefully share with you that, yes, we're here today, we're talking for an hour, but BPI consistently focuses on this every single day from the time we wake up to the time we sign off. And we are building resources from experts in our industry to really help craft what this roadmap and this future looks like. And it's not going to be a linear process. There are struggles. We're going to stumble and fail. But just a quick note, as we were talking before the session, the compostable products and packaging industry is so young, and it has so much promise for being a part of the solution that we're all trying to figure out, along with recyclables and reuse. So I'm going to say clarity, roadmap, and connections. Let's make things happen.
We have to call the composting industry young because we're all older than it, and we want to be young. So that might be the conclusion of our pre-panel chat. Great. So I'm going to start off with kind of a question for all three of you, but Gina and Rebecca in particular. You sit at very different points in the supply chain, but they're very closely connected and intertwined as well. Can you each talk to us a little bit about the role that packaging plays within your segment and work, and maybe where you see this paradox in the title of our session playing out within that? A heads up, I'm going to ask you this same question in a little bit. We're going to open up the floor and get some additional perspective. So I'm letting you think now, especially those of you who know that I know you, know that I can call on you. So start thinking about some answers now, but I want to hear our panel's perspectives first. Go ahead, Gina.
So, as I mentioned, we're a grower association. We represent about 50% of the family farmers the fresh produce that is grown in the United States, and about 50% of the organic produce in the United States. A lot of that is because California is such a big producer of fresh produce. And it's also the origin of where the first shipment of iceberg lettuce was loaded onto a train and shipped from the West Coast to the East Coast, because they were trying to ship it over and just showed up as slop, right? And so as we were diving into this packaging work, I have a soil science background. I'm not a packaging expert. So I was learning as much as I could. And one of the things that we came across was the description of, going through this process, and fresh produce is alive. You're trying to keep it as alive as long as you possibly can. And part of that process is harvesting it at the peak of freshness and then just holding on to it. So the description that we had was selling fresh produce is like holding a melting ice cube and asking somebody how much they're willing to pay for it, right? So that there's a limited shelf life, and there's also no kill step, right? So for us, it's how do we assure food safety? And how do we assure that quality across the whole supply chain? And what we're dealing with here is things that are getting shipped from the West Coast to the East Coast, right? The way that our current food system is set up is we're having strawberries grown in Salinas and eaten in Ottawa, right? So how do we kind of manage that current supply chain and also deliver safe and high quality produce? So the reason why iceberg lettuce is called iceberg lettuce is because it was packed in ice and then shipped in these big wooden crates. And today we have a much different system for how do we preserve that freshness. It's not in ice and wooden crates. A lot of times it's in some other packaging, which I think is the most visceral point at which consumers interact with fresh produce. And there's a lot of work and studies that's done on, quality and post-harvest and freshness, but really it's so much of the work that packaging does, 90% of the work that packaging does happens before the consumer ever even sees it. So it's maintaining moisture and temperature, it's the gas exchange, it's protection, it's ensuring that even laborers are paid adequately, right? So a lot of berries, you can trace back who picked that berry to the clamshell, and if that, whether that be a food safety recall or just ensuring that they actually get paid for the work that they've done, it's a critical fact, right? So there's so many factors that goes into it, and so one of the things that we try to focus on is why is it in packaging in the first place? And so how do we address that, the function of that packaging as opposed to the material and figuring out, like, do we like this material or not because of, whatever reason? Does it work or does it not work? And why does it work? And how do we innovate in areas where it's not working? So I think that's probably a longer answer than what you're thinking of. But essentially, we think about packaging a lot in terms of how do we deliver the safest, high quality, and most economical product to consumers, because fresh produce is so critical for everybody to have access to. So we want to ensure that we can maintain that access.
I've not seen the roadmap that Gina's talking about that the Western Growers Association with a few other partners created. Highly recommend taking a look at it. It's on page 30 something. There's a really nice visual graphic of how you kind of categorized different commodities by how fragile they are, and then what are the packaging solutions. And I really like the term functional sustainability that your roadmap comes up, that you included in that, because it's the packaging has to play a function that includes reducing food waste, not just what is the packaging, what's the material, how recyclable is it not. It's also how well does that packaging also help reduce food waste. So it brings the paradox together. So in food service, we buy a lot of food, serve a lot of food. So packaging plays a role in how items get to our kitchens. In food service, it plays a little bit of a role in how our diners experience our food, because we do have grab and go options. We do have to-go boxes and takeaway for people who need it. They're running between meetings. And then we also have snack bars. So we do purchase things like granola bars or other things that might come in a single serving package. We're doing more and more kind of bulk in those kinds of items as well. But people always hear me, I studied food anthropology. I like to think about the human side of systems change. And so I think, and I've done a lot of work with the CPG industry and retailers in my previous role before this one. So I think a lot about not just the functional role that packaging plays, but it plays a cultural role as well. So I think of the 4 P's of packaging, which are protection is number 1, which is part of what helps reduce food waste. I will say now that I work in a highly operational, high volume food service world, there's also a really big protection functionality around reducing cross-contamination, allergens, those kinds of things. Food safety is very important, and allergens are part of that. The second P is portability. So that includes, you might immediately think of kind of for consumers being able to put something. I don't know why in the U.S. we feel like we need to have eat all of our meals in cars and things like that. But you think of portability like that, but portability also means the iceberg lettuce has to move through the supply chain. So it's got to be able to go from the grower or from the manufacturer to the final point. The third P is portioning. So there's an element to this that is related to portion sizing, nutrition labeling, all of that. But also that's what enable sales. I mean, we pay for items by, a unit. So even in food service where it's larger volume, that's still the portioning aspect, packaging helps kind of pricing and those sorts of things. And then the final thing is a little bit of a cheat, maybe it's a hyphen, it's not one word, is provide information. And so providing information, again, with expiration dates and those kinds of things, there is maybe a food waste component. But that's also where things like the material, the package itself also provides information. We've talked about how berries, they often come in a plastic clamshell so that people can see the item. So that's the material choice itself also conveys information. And of course, there's the label and the story. And the reason why I bring those 4 Ps up, and if you have any other Ps, gotta be a P, I'd be happy to know. I feel like I've captured everything, but it very well could have not captured something in that. But the reason why I kind of articulate these is it seems like a lot of the focus has been on retail and consumers. And what I'm trying to do and here to say is that there's also the B2B, food service, larger volume opportunities in packaging innovation and changing the packaging system, because we still need these 4 Ps, but it looks different. So example that we've talked about is the one I just mentioned with strawberry clamshells, berry clamshells. Retailers want those berries to be very visible, and they know that consumers will, shoppers in a store will look at the box, and if there's a moldy strawberry in there, you're not going to buy it. Chefs are getting strawberry deliveries. At the same time, they're getting so many other things. They're getting a huge case, and they're not going to the clamshell doesn't play the same role. Like a chef's not going to look at every single one. And so there's just different kind of levers and dials and things to play with when you're working on the B2B supply chain that I think has been kind of maybe under focused on. And we'd love to be more of a partner to look at different innovations and ways to reduce plastic packaging and waste.
Yeah, thank you both. That's taken us really kind of from farm through, call it middle supply chain. And I want to remind you all that regardless of how you identified your sector here at the beginning, we are also all consumers. So I invite you to put your consumer hat on too and think through what are your observations and behaviors as you interact with packaging as well. I'm totally one of those people that flips the strawberry clamshell upside down before I buy it, right? So before we start thinking about solutions, which we'll talk about here in a minute, think about the behaviors and perceptions that you have, even as professionals hypothetically caring about food waste, that where you are taking advantage of that packaging and what would be the result of that. So thanks for taking us kind of through that. Leslie, what do you want to add? You give us a great introduction of BPI. Give us your own maybe observations of the paradox of packaging and the role that it plays.
I think as we think about building systems and at these different levels, all of this is to protect, capture food waste. We want food waste to be consumed, of course. We would like to make sure that, we're following the hierarchy of food waste. But, when you look at building a successful system, what happens when a full crate of strawberry clamshells needs to be composted, needs to be sent to a facility? How do we look at, ease and eliminating, operational costs, contamination? And it is a lot easier for a composter to take that whole crate of strawberries that may be, moldy and put the whole thing with compostable packaging in a pile. We're talking, ease, large machinery. There doesn't need to be a lot of touches. Touches cost money. Composters are manufacturers of a product. They're a business, and they make a really high quality compost with the right feedstocks. But we need to make sure that, we're talking about ease of chefs. We're talking about ease of growers and packaging, ease of consumers. But we also need to make sure that we're following it through all the way to the end, because not only do we want food waste to end up in a compost pile, but we need that soil amendment. We need that compost back in our soil so that we can actually have healthy, sustainable soil underneath our feet everywhere we go, but also looking at our food and reducing our reliance on fertilizers and other things. Let's lean into nature. And I think that's really what compostability tries to do.
Great, thank you so much. As we were preparing as a panel a week or so ago, there was a really astute observation, I think, that everyone comes to packaging from a different perspective and a different why. So this is why this is entitled An Open Dialogue, and this is where we're going to make it open a bit. So I'm going to ask Eric to come up and grab maybe Leslie's microphone. We'll come back to our panel, have no fear. But this is not the time for Q&A yet. We will have that time. Please save questions. But if there is a application of packaging or a paradox that you've observed that we have not covered, I would love to hear that, because we're going to talk about solutions and what we're doing about here in a second, and we want to make sure we've got representation of different perspectives. So yes, Joe, I think, right? Yeah, please. You flip it up.
Yeah, it is. Okay, just takes a second. All right. So one of the paradoxes that I've seen, we inbound upwards of 500 tons a day, and probably 300 tons of that is depackaging in some way, shape, or form. One of the paradoxes that we have seen specific to some compostable packaging, right, is they're not all created the same, right? You can have remnants a year, 18 months, 2 years later left in your compost pile. Another paradox that we have seen is with certifying bodies like OMRI, for example, right? Very strict on feedstocks. And so there's some, what's that?
Oh, just hold it closer to your mouth.
OMRI, like an OMRI certification, for example, you know, there's some stringency on the types of feedstocks allowed, right? STA, not so much, right? And that's some of the things that we've seen, as well as when you go through a depackaging operation, right? The non-organic output of that is very, very, very hard to find an answer for that's not landfill. I've been after this crusade for 3 years, and I've yet to find a suitable answer that I can also bake into service cost and keep it reasonable for customers.
Yeah. Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, it's both the tension of certifications, but the realities of how technology works, but it's also our solutions still have problems that need solutions, right? Yeah. The materials coming out. So
100%.
Yeah, great observation. Thank you. Anyone else want to add yep, please. Great. We'll go back and then back up here to the front.
Hi, thanks everyone. Okay, so my question is related to consumer messaging.
Oh, wait, is this a question?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
The paradox. I'm so sorry.
You may continue.
My deepest apologies. I think the paradox is that everyone's making all these products with all these solutions, but the consumer messaging is not clear at all. Like, it has the recycle symbol, or it says this is compostable, and then the paradox is, like, the average American doesn't understand that just because they put it in the trash, it's not getting composted, which is a later Q&A I have. So I think that's the paradox between all this good work, but it's not getting to the consumer in a way. Like, remember when the plastic lid said, when you're done, replace the cap? Like, who approved that, right? Now it says, put the cap back on. Better. So I think the paradox is between the good work that you're doing, but still mass confusion with the American people.
Yeah, and real estate on packaging is expensive, right? So the messaging of that is challenging. We have limited space. Leslie will be prepared to answer your question later when we get back to Q&A. Yeah, up here in the front.
Maybe two quick paradoxes. One of them building on that last statement. I think there's not often a recognition with consumers of how long these systems take and how disparate different communities and their collection systems really look. And so we're trying to fix this on like a 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 year time frame when it's really like a 10 or 20 year time frame. And so really recognizing the need to have grace with ourselves as a society as we work through these really hard issues. So that's one. The other one that I think I doesn't get called out enough is that there is, on the one hand, this collective, rightful, I think, societal freak out around conventional plastics, persistent plastics, and accumulation in bodies and ecosystems, but there's not enough honest dialogue about what it means to address that. You have to go from that to something, and that's where I think the work that Leslie's talking about on the compostables front is one of the only channels that I see that addresses an actual move away from plastics while also addressing the key thing that you were talking about, which is you need functionality, right? Like if we try to just ban the plastics, it doesn't work for the food system. So I think, to me, that's really the big paradox in all of this, is we're trying to like solve the plastics problem largely by just using a little bit less plastic rather than really leaning into the key message here, which is that we've got to move to something else, and to something else that has the functionality that we need from these modern materials.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great add, both on the latter point, I think, around we can't just bring the problem to the table. We need the solution to be maybe something entirely new. And I like that, the reminder of the time component as well. We talked a little bit too about, is this a like, if you build it, they will come scenario, or is it they must come first and then I'll build it scenario? And that impacts timing too, right? Okay, let's do one more. I see a hand in the very back. We're gonna make Eric get his steps in today too.
Hi. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here and see you and hear you. The paradox that comes to my mind is in legislation, where you're talking about zero waste legislation, or reducing single-use plastic regulation. They often defer to either recyclability or compostability, but there's not enough composting facilities. And those regulations, there's no tying of those two regulations together.
Yeah, regulation without the infrastructure to support implementation of said regulation, right? Thank you. All right, let's give Leslie her mic back. Any panel, just open question, any responses to the paradoxes you heard? I know we're going to dive a bit here into a minute into the approaches and solutions to this, but anything you want to plus one or comment on now?
Yes. Making sure this is on. Thank you. I think that's why we're all in the room, right? How do we figure these things out? And when I talk about clarity, Joe, good to see you. It is, clear and consistent messaging, clear and consistent identifiability is so important as we look at building out these systems and these different streams. Again, how BPI works with every single stakeholder. I really talk about the BPI certification mark and the certification process as like a language that we're all speaking throughout the entire supply chain, so that when you see a BPI certification mark, you know and understand it's met certain standards, it has an intended end of life. But yes, we have to build out that infrastructure. We have to build out that policy and those systems so that we're all on the same page and we're talking about it. There were a lot of paradoxes. So I think you're going to cover more in your questions, but those are the high level.
I think that number one, I think the depackaging thing is so I could watch that like a Yule log. Like I feel like you just stare at it for hours and hours. So fascinating. Yeah, send it to me.
Shout out to, we do have a depackaging session that you can all attend and watch the Yule log a little bit later.
But we think about I guess in terms of technology development, because the timeline takes a long time, and then whether or not it's accepted. A lot of the packaging requirements that are not food safety and shelf life related, or maybe even they are, come from the buyers to the growers. So, if something is for stackability on the shelf, that will often come from the retailer. And so the grower doesn't really have a voice in saying whether or not they think it should go in X packaging or not. But innovation is needed. We were just talking about this earlier today, and you could have some of these really, really cool and interesting packaging alternatives or innovations. And then at the end of the day, if the buyer or the consumer just isn't into it, then that's decades of innovation that you just cannot use. And it's so frustrating. We were just talking about this really cool technology before this that we were like, what? Why isn't it? It's accepted in Europe. It sounds great over here. So I do think the innovation pipeline is a big challenge.
Can I add to that? I think, if it isn't something that is embraced or wanted by the consumer, that's where policy really, really plays a part. If we're going to actually have systems and solutions, we need to have a structure. And, love the free market economy, really supports innovation and drive to where we need to go. But we also need the guardrails. And I think that the lack of guardrails and the differing guardrails that we're trying to operate in right now is extremely challenging. and not a long-term solution.
And I think as with innovation, there's always, there's failure, or there's moments where maybe we've moved too quickly and we have to pull back. And I think that is a challenge because of we've talked a little bit about consumer confusion, or an example we were saying, consumers aren't into it, or you have influencers who are actively putting out misinformation about something, and it's actually a wonderful solution that then people don't want because of the, stirring the pot that's happened. But I think that's one thing that we have seen with compostables, which is a challenge in a lot of the municipalities that initially accepted compostable packaging and then have said, no, we don't want compostable packaging anymore. We only want food scraps. It's a challenge because it kind of helps seed a little bit of, already a lot of consumers feel, misled. We thought this was getting recycled, and then turns out it wasn't. And so just trying to figure out, how do we, as we're building new infrastructure, ensuring in some ways maybe it's kind of, how to kind of build the trust along the way and not do things that might eventually undermine the trust. And sometimes that's just going to happen. But that's why I would put a plug for B2B solutions or testing, because if we do something different in kitchens, it still requires change management. I'm not saying it's easy, but because we have teams of people, it's their job, and we're training and all these things, we can kind of try things, and then if they don't work, then we can kind of revert back until the solution is finalized, which with households and consumers, it can be hard to then pull back if we try something and it doesn't work, because then you've lost trust, or you have in our media environment a lot of confusion or actual like disinformation of people actively putting information that's not factual intentionally out in the world, which we know there's a lot of that right now too.
Yeah. I had one more thought. Somebody had mentioned communication. You had mentioned policy. I think one of the things that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. And I think that's what everybody says, but it's so true especially with fresh produce, with like the communication aspect. If you're expecting the end user, the consumer, to be the person responsible for disposing in the end of, ensuring that the end of life goes to the correct pathway, that's millions of touch points of communication, and that's such a big challenge. In terms of policy, with that specifically, the strawberry PET clamshell is one of the most recyclable items that you can have. There's an existing market for PET. The whole strawberry industry is committed to, instead of doing like a paper sticker, they have what's called a BOPP, a BOP label, that you can actually just take. It makes it more recyclable because you're not having that contamination from the paper sticker. So it's an extremely recyclable product, but they're trying to make a market for that PET so that you can have that similar to the bottle, where there's a fee attached to it, so you can have that incentive for the MRFs to take those in. But a lot of policy is saying, well, no more of this material. So all of that innovation that's gone into the PET clamshell and like creating the BOP label and creating the fees and all of that for incentivizing recycling, now that's coming back, right? So I think a lot of it is going to be like what has been done by the industry, what investments have been made, and how do we move from there and step up instead of going back to step one.
Thank you. We have so much to talk about in so little time. Okay, so I was going to skip it. I'm going to ask the question anyway, and then we'll move on to. But tell us a little bit more about the solutions that you're finding. We've been circling around this Venn diagram of packaging and food waste. There is a magic middle. I think I would ask the question, how big is it? A little bit, right? But maybe just give us some examples. Where are you finding innovation or solution that is advancing the goals of both sustainable packaging and reducing food waste? Rebecca, do you want to go first?
I'll go first. There are some things that we found and some things we're working on. And with our strategy, I've kind of broken it down into, this is specifically around reducing single-use plastics. We have 3 kind of strategies that we're taking to implement solutions. So the first is reducing. There are some items where if we can switch from smaller pack size to larger pack size, that reduces the overall amount of packaging. Of course, then we have to think about the food waste angle, because you have a larger package. Once you open it, any protection, from gases or anything in there that might then, so we have to make sure that we're managing the turnover of our inventory for things that we are switching to larger pack sizes. So reduce is the first. The second is eliminate. So there are places where we can just eliminate the need for packaging altogether. One specific example is working with produce vendors to remove some plastic packaging for cherry tomatoes, and just because again we're large volume, so we can take off a flat of cherry tomatoes, and it's just once we do that with our produce suppliers, then that can just go into the order guide for our teams to order. But then again, we always want to ensure that we're doing things that still align with what our core business is, which is making really delicious food. And so during the peak summer season where heirloom tomatoes are available, it's okay if those are coming in a plastic clamshell. We don't want to prevent our chefs from being able to buy those things. So we're kind of looking for where can we, if we were to tell the chefs you can only buy the cherry tomatoes because those have zero plastic, that like undermines the core business that we're in and what the chefs like to do. So you have to strike that balance. So finding kind of either through innovation or through just simple moves, how can we eliminate where it's not necessary? I know some of our teams also talk about things where there's not a food safety reason. We buy a lot of dishes and things like that, and it's sort of like, has anyone ever bought like when you buy the big bags of toilet paper and then you open the big bag and it's actually like the 4 rolls that are also, it's like packaging upon packaging all the way down, like the turtles. Where are there opportunities where it's like this doesn't actually play that much? Maybe the only thing could be on the manufacturing side, it might be a portioning thing. They have one line where they're wrapping 4 rolls of toilet paper. Some of them get sold as 4 rolls. Some of them get then collated into a bigger thing, so that maybe it does play a purpose for the manufacturer, but maybe not for food safety or other safety reason. So finding opportunities to eliminate. And then the final is circulate. And in food service and particularly dining, and by and large, people are dining in the office. And so we already use a lot of reusables, which is just metal utensils, ceramic plates, ceramic mugs. So we're using the terminology of returnables for things that would otherwise be a disposable. So we have disposables, and we use composting as to the extent that we can, especially if there's actually composting where we are in that particular office. So we have disposables, and then for circulate, we focus on where can we get more of our diners to actually use the ceramic option, so to have more reusables, and then returnables. And for returnables, that can be front of house returnables where someone's taking a more durable plastic to-go box and bringing it back. But that is something more and more we're doing with our suppliers, with some of our produce vendors around, and coffee has been a big one where we are now often getting coffee beans in durable plastic buckets that we then send back to the coffee vendor. So returnables and again, because of all the behavior change and all of the challenges with individual consumers, we're doing as much as we can with our supply chain and with back of house, because we can train our teams on here's how you properly return this. Other things come into play. You have to have storage space for empty containers. So there are some challenges on the reverse logistics side and on storage. So infrastructure matters at the scale of like recycling and composting. Infrastructure matters even like we have a kitchen of this size and we have storage space of this size. We were joking, I think yesterday in a session, if you have an office in Manhattan and you need a closet for empty containers to go back, that is like the most expensive empty container closet you can imagine, right? So space and all those things, they can also be at a premium. So there's always these other factors that come into play that we need to think about.
All right, I'm gonna move us on to one more topic, and then we'll do some Q&A to round us out. But I feel like we can't have this conversation without talking a little bit about policy, right? So if we can go, actually here, let me get to here. If you were not here for our first Mentimeter, please scan back in. We're gonna have one more question for you as we talk about EPR. So I'm gonna give you 10 seconds. We're gonna switch to our Mentimeter. 9, 8, 7, 6.5, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's switch over to our Mentimeter. go to our next screen. All right, before we talk about this for approximately 2.5 minutes, what do you know? What is your awareness level? This is anonymous instead of making you raise your hand. So be honest. How much do you know about EPR? If you don't know what EPR stands for, that would be a really good indication of which answer to put here. Okay, this is great. A lot of people know it exists. That's a good start. And then we're probably skewing more to the what is EPR side. Okay, so panel, knowing this, lightning round. Who wants to take the challenge of explaining EPR to a room of 5th graders? Anyone? Leslie? No, I am one of the 5th graders. So who, do you want to take it? Okay, Gina's going to take it for us. And then I'd like you maybe each to just tell us a little bit, like, what role does this play in the conversation we've been having, particularly as it applies to food waste as well. And we can go back to the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, should be a slide actually with a map that kind of just, so I might not even have to say anything. But EPR is essentially, it's a policy approach that shifts the responsibility of the end of life for these materials to what's called the producer, meaning the person who's putting the packaging in front of the consumer. So it's a little bit of a weird term, but essentially it's moving the responsibility. There are 7 states that have enacted EPR policy in the United States, with several more that are looking to explore it, or they have language that has been introduced for it. The most recent one that has come online is California. Oregon was the first. Colorado has followed after that, and then Washington. So there's a lot of movement in this space. I think there should be one more slide that has bullet points, and I won't read these, but essentially, there's targets, especially this one's specific to California, but there are typically target dates for recyclability of the content or recycled content and things like that.
Great. Okay, so why do we care about, why are we talking about this? How is this relevant? Leslie, why don't you kick us off on how that applies to the conversation we've already had?
Yeah, so thank you for giving a little bit of an overview. I think, when we talk about guardrails, this is a part of defining those guardrails. EPR, it really does create those boundaries of what materials are okay, what can be sold in a market, just different specs and requirements like ASTM 6400, like the ASTM standards for compostability. Wanted to go a different direction.
If it's a quick detour.
Well, no, so I'm just thinking, I think there are a lot of challenges here because the different states are coming online, and there isn't necessarily unification within each EPR bill at the different state level. I think what BPI really tries to focus on is making sure that composting and compostability is inclusive and one of the solutions. So when you look at this, you're trying to create the ideal state and what materials should be used when. And again, BPI focuses on compostability and really, being related to food. But having a composter at the table in the advisory board and making sure that we're talking about recycling and compostability at the same time, because I think as we talk about the evolution of these solutions, it is going to take that 10, 20 years. And I don't think we all want to do recyclability and then go back and do compostability. So really making sure that we're addressing all reuse, recycle, and compostables in the same conversation.
I think that I remember talking years ago to some people working on circular economy, and I guess this is why I brought up the point earlier around municipalities accepting packaging and then kind of pulling back, because the idea was, as you started to see cities have composting infrastructure, that would actually generate it's a food waste solution and a packaging solution. And so it is important that we think about both, because for those of you who maybe don't focus on packaging but you focus on food waste, the idea is that some of the fees that will come out of EPR legislation will go into building up recycling and hopefully compostability or composting infrastructure, which supports some of the food waste work as well. So there's definitely a connection point there. And the way that we've been thinking about this is the unit economics of packaging is potentially shifting because packages will have a fee assessed, and it's different by state. It's complicated. But what we're looking at is what does that mean for our costs? How will fees to what extent will EPR fees, and then some states require reuse and other things. Every state is kind of different. To what extent is that going to catalyze innovation? To what extent is it just going to be a pass-through cost? Like, are we going to get invoices from distributors that have an EPR fee, or is it just going to get embedded in the cost of the item? So there's a lot of questions there. And then we're also looking at where might we be a producer, and every state defines producer differently. So probably a lot of people in this room are familiar with the fact that if you're a retailer and you're working on food waste, every city, every state that you operate in has different rules on food waste and labeling, and we're recreating that same thing, right? Because in the U.S. we do things by state and local government. We don't do a lot of this through federal government, just kind of the way the U.S. works. So there's a lot of complexity, but at the same time, opportunity for innovation. What we've done, and Gina has participated in one of these, because we buy a lot of food, and this will really hit particularly, CPG companies, growers, and others that are producing the food. We've kind of raised our hand to say we want to be, if you need to test a new packaging solution, we want to make sure that it's operationally viable. It hits the 4 Ps of packaging that we need for large volume food service. So we've had some workshops and things that are really about ideating because it's pretty early days. And my personal goal is to ensure that we take this moment as an opportunity to catalyze innovation. It's like great if we just get some fees and those go to infrastructure, but is that really going to have as much change as we could have if we use this moment and the energy around figuring this out to also drive innovation at the same time?
I was going to say those partnerships are really critical because essentially fresh produce, we suffer from what's called a minor crops challenge, which means, so for California, for example, there are over 400 commodities that are produced, and certainly there's overlap with some of those, but for modified atmosphere packaging, for example, those micro perforations are tailored to the respiration rate of that specific produce item. So that innovation takes a super long time, and so having partnerships where you can actually accelerate some of that innovation is really critical. I guess how we're interacting with that is we're hosting, for example, next month we're going to have field visits with growers where we bring out policymakers and innovative packaging companies and just having a sit down with growers and saying, what is missing here? What are the key innovations that need to happen? And then where do we see that technology showing up in the next 10, 20 years?
Can I drop, thinking about hope? I will say that it is clear across so many data points that consumers are looking for more sustainable packaging, and they're holding the companies and the producers responsible for investing in innovation and bringing us more sustainable packaging. So there is hope.
We got to hope. Whoever put that one in, there's your answer. All right, I know we are almost at time. I promised at least one question to the person I almost cut off earlier. So, Eric, if you want to come grab a microphone one more time, let's do one, maybe 2 questions if we're really quick. I'm going to promise you the first one, and then I do need to follow up very quickly on your homework assignment before we leave.
Okay, so this may be naive. I'm asking the BPI question. So if a person can't compost the container, should it go into the landfill? And is it like, I guess what I'm asking is, if something is not recyclable, it contaminates the recycling thing. So what to do if you can't compost the container? Is it better to put it in the landfill, and will it still break down even though it's not in ideal conditions as compared to a traditional container?
Okay, that was a complex question.
Sorry.
Renaud, I don't know if you have on the science of the landfill, but let me first address. So let's keep in mind progress over perfection. We need the compostable industry resins, going back to even the raw materials to make the resins. We need to scale that. So at this point where we are, if we took all of the conventional plastic and wanted to switch to a compostable bioplastic, we couldn't. The industry is too young, the infrastructure isn't there, but the market opportunity is absolutely there for all the reasons why we're on this stage. So it is ultimately a more sustainable option to get a certified compostable. And let's use certified. BPI has a certification, but there's TUV. There are other certifications out there. Certification is so key because it's making sure that the base level requirements of what's returned to the soil are there. It's the check. It's the check and balance system. So please, yes, use that compostable product, and then also look to you're a consumer. You have power with your choices. So think about, with your municipalities, are you asking about a drop-off? Is there an opportunity to get a drop-off? Is there an opportunity for some sort of, private option and collection? So be a part of the solution of, yes, use the product, realizing that it's not ideal right now, but what part are you going to play to make sure that we keep moving forward? And then, Renaud, would you address the landfill question?
Wait for a mic really quick. There you go. Connect afterwards. Perfect. All right. We are short on time. And so I have 2 invitations for you that I'm going to actually have you do some work while our panelists share a closing thought. First is we're about to go to lunch. I invite you, with all the new information that you've learned, to consider the role that packaging played in delivering your lunch today, and maybe how it would look different on the buffet if packaging weren't there. So, little thought exercise. Go think about it. Second invitation, in response to Dana's invitation on the stage today, looking at the future of food, that we're more than 10 years. We're celebrating a 10-year milestone in the movement. What's the next 20? I would like you to take your phones or your notebooks or whatever you have out. As our speakers share their verbal response to this question, I want you writing a response to this question, and you are required to share it with at least one person before you leave this room. The question is, you have 2 options. One is either what's something you learned today, or 2, what is something that you individually as a human leaving this room are going to do in the next 10 days with that information that you learned? I realize a lot of us were not specifically tied to the packaging industry in our little sector analysis at the beginning, but we all touch components of this. So what's a question you can ask, a person you can talk to, something you can learn, an influence you can have? These are people that touch it every day. I'm going to ask you to share. What are you going to do? What's one thing you're going to do in the next 10 days on this issue within your sphere of influence? I want to see heads down, typing and writing while you listen. Please share that, and then we'll close out. Gina, do you want to go first?
Before this panel, I was interrogating Leslie about compostables. I had a similar question. Where does it go? What happens? What does it look like? How do we know that it's compostable? How do consumers know this? So as major users of compost, these streams, we think about them up front, right? Because we're trying to keep the fresh produce alive for as long as possible and the quality as high as possible. But then at the end of it, it's not growers who are figuring out the end of life disposal, but they are interacting with compost quite a bit. So I think I'll just keep asking you questions about it, because I just think that there's, it's that whole, the whole chain that we need to think about.
If I think about 10 days, Gina and I have a call on the calendar. We do. And I do have a call with one of our snack vendors, and this is coming out of the workshop. We've kind of met each other and figured out, and we're going to be talking about what can we do together to engage our business with some of your growers, and with our snack provider coming to the workshops, learning more about our business, we had a lot of circularity experts and others there, and that kind of sparked this organization to go look for more solutions, and they have one they're excited to share with me. So I think continuing to say, yep, we want to partner, let's talk about it, let's figure out how we can start moving and bringing others along. And that's kind of long-term plan, but there's already on my calendar some immediate things to happen. So if you have any solutions in this area, would love to hear about them as well.
I hear Rebecca saying she wants lots of meeting calendar invites in the next 10 days. I'm just kidding.
Might happen in June.
Well, so Rebecca, I'll build on something. You know, I think BPI really seeks to provide the resources and opportunities for experts to create content that can be utilized to clarify, really correct misinformation, but we haven't done a lot of B2B coverage. So I may be asking you on a webinar soon.
Sounds good.
Yeah, but I think that is, and just continuing to, I see so many faces in the room that I can't wait to talk to. But yeah, let's keep challenging each other. And I think, every part of the supply chain is a business in one way, shape, or form. And we really, I think, lose sight of that when we're crafting these solutions. And it has to be realistic. It has to be logical. And, again, I'll say progress over perfection, but let's sit at the table. Let's figure it out.
Awesome. Well, thank you to our panelists. Thank you for being a part of our largely extended panel today. Please do take a moment to reflect on this, both as you're eating delicious food over lunch and also as you're networking and talking with people as you leave the room today. But thank you and enjoy the rest of your summit.